tonight I want to do a review of the first 1,000 years of church history. That's where we are, by the way, for those of you who've been regularly participating. We've reached about 900 or so AD in our quest through church history. And if you do the math, you realize we're about 2,000 years off from Pentecost. And so 1000 AD is pretty much the halfway point. So we're pretty much through the half of the history of the church. Now, the reason I want to do a review lesson tonight is threefold. Number one, obviously some of you have not been in the class up until now. And so to just continue on without some sort of review would sort of leave you in the dust. So I don't want to do that. So we'll give you some sort of understanding of where we have been. Secondly, I think those of you who have been participating regularly, it would be good to cement some of these ideas for a better understanding of the flow of where we've been going. You know, sometimes you have to get up above the forest to see the trees, so that's what we're going to do tonight. But there is a third reason for doing this. This is really an opportunity to do an overview that will launch us into the second half of the church age. And what you will discover is that we will become much more detailed in the second half of church history, and it will take us much longer to go through it for the very obvious reasons. Number one, the closer we are to the events, the more details we have of those events. So our understanding of things like the Reformation is certainly going to be much greater than our understanding of things going on in the 4th century. Things going on in the 16th century are much closer to our memory. And so we have much more detail and source material to work with. And again, it'll be within the memory of the people considering it. So from this point, we're going to be working into a much more relevant, quote-unquote, section of time, because it's going to be a part of our experience, especially as we cross out of the medieval church into the Reformation. All right, so what I'm going to do on this board then is I'm going to draw a timeline, and we're going to put on that timeline some of the significant events that took place, and we'll talk about some of the other things surrounding that particular thing. Okay, so I'm going to see just how straight a line I can draw across this board. Okay, that's good luck with that, right? Okay, so we'll go across like this. We'll assume this is church history for the first 1,000 years, right? Okay, so this will be the end of our look, and there will be more church history to come, of course. And this is our starting point. And the starting point of the church, the starting point of the church age, this event here is Pentecost. The falling of the Spirit of God upon the early disciples at Pentecost. What year did this occur? Thank you. Can be more specific? Nope. 30 AD. Okay? I'm not going to put the AD there because it'll just confuse people. Let's just put 30. Okay? 30. All right. 30 AD, roughly. Somewhere between 30 and 32, depending on your view of the birth of Christ in terms of when he was born and whether he was born in 6 BC or 4 BC and whether he was full 30 years plus 3 or whatever. Roughly 30 AD. Most scholars would put it at 30. Okay. So we have the falling of the Spirit upon the Jews, the disciples at that time, and then, of course, the conversion of the Jews that took place, right? Several thousand came to faith almost immediately. And then as the book of Acts unfolds, we see even more of the Jews coming to faith. You know, Peter and John preached another sermon not too long after that. A few more thousand came to faith. So we're in this short period of time. Now, I'm going to place between here and here, I'm going to call this section here, we called this section the primordial church. Primordial church. And we're going to put this out to about 60 AD. Just the first 30 years or so of the life of the church. All right? What are some of the notable events that take place between 30 and 60 in the church life? Apostle Paul converted. That's one. And his missionary journeys, correct? What else?
Jerusalem Council.
The Jerusalem Council, deciding the issue of the relationship between the Jews and the Gentiles in the church. Anything else notable in this period of time? The gospel going out first to the Jews under Peter's leadership, and then eventually out to the Gentiles under Paul's leadership through the missionary journeys would be during this period of time. But there's one more very significant thing going on in this period of time.
Is that when the dispersion started?
The dispersion of the Jews is going to be a little after this point in 70, but it could fit right here near the end of it.
Persecution?
That will be a part of this, but let's hold that thought for a moment. One more significant event that's taking place in here is the writing of the New Testament. The majority of the books of the New Testament are being written in this period of the primordial church, right? I mean, there's a few outside of this realm, but the Gospels, all of Paul's letters, and even a few of the non-Pauline letters of the New Testament are being written in this particular period of time, okay? So this is the primordial church. This is that very primitive, early church, okay? There's a number of things about this kind of church. I'll give you a few characteristics of it. You fill in some more, okay? At this point, the church is small, okay? It's mostly Jewish. Very good. What else? Not real organized. Not a great deal of hierarchy established here at this particular point. I mean, deacons are established early in the book of Acts, but elders aren't really till later, okay? Which then becomes bishops and so on, right?
Most of the churches were in people's homes.
People's homes, correct. Church is centered where? Church, the church was centered where? At this time? Jerusalem, followed by, where did the church move to after Jerusalem? It moved north to Antioch. Remember, Paul and Barnabas were sent from Antioch, the church in Antioch. Okay, so in this primordial period, you got the small church centered at Jerusalem, largely Jewish in nature, although it does develop into a Jewish and Gentile kind of environments modeled after Jewish worship practices in the synagogues. The believers were meeting in homes. We have the very beginnings of church hierarchy. We have the writing and early dissemination of the letters, although when I say early dissemination, I mean not too far at this point to churches themselves, but not too far beyond this. And we have some early forms of opposition and persecution that are taking place in this time period. Okay, so this is the very earliest point of the church. And we might make this mark here at 60 to mean that particular point where Jesus' prophecy in Acts 1 comes true, where he says, I'm sending you out to Jerusalem, to Judea and Samaria, and even to the uttermost parts of the earth. Okay, so you begin to see this early sense in which they're in Jerusalem, but then you begin to see the gospel moving out from there. Paul going out, Peter going out, others going out, and the gospel going out into the world, okay? But starting right about here, or somewhere in here, you might say morphing past this point, and going out to this point here. This is not to scale, all right? All right? This is going to go out to 311, all right? So we're going to go from about 60 AD out to about 311. So we're going to finish the first century, go all the way through the second century, and into the third century, and then even a bit into the fourth century. All right? So the rest of the first, all the second, third, and a little bit of the fourth centuries, we're going to be talking about a period of time in here. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change this color right here. I'm going to call this the primordial church. And this church here would be known as the early church. Call this the early church. Okay? Period, you can see right through this period. Okay. Now, what we're going to be talking about in this particular period of time is a more settled church. That primordial church is going to change from being just sort of a small little house meeting kind of church into a more settled, we might even say official kind of church in which we really begin to see some things taking place. And the one primary characteristic that's going to define this era here is, what's the one thing that's going to define the church in this period?
Can I say persecution?
You can say persecution. That is correct. This is going to be not only the early church, but some have even called it the persecuted church. The persecuted church. Because this is going to be the thing that's going to, during this period of time, is going to really define and encapsulate and govern how the church operates during this period of time. Persecution against believers is going to happen. Right about here in 64. Anybody know what happened in 64? The fire in Rome under Nero. And the fire in Rome, who did he blame it on? He blamed it on believers. He blamed it on Christians. Some of the very first persecution really starts to break out here at about this point when it became obvious that Christians could be blamed for things. Okay? Right about here, we have another event. Let's put it at 70 AD. What happens there? Fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple under the Roman Titus. Okay? So I'm going to put fall of Jerusalem. Okay? About 70 AD. This is going to be the scattering of the Jews, okay, from this point. But this is also going to have deep impact upon the church at this point as well. These are going to be the two things that really sort of advance the physical opposition to the church and the gospel. We're also going to see rise up now in this period of time not only physical persecution, but even forms of spiritual persecution will now begin with doctrinal persecution or doctrinal questions that will come up. Who can tell me what the first and most significant of the doctrinal errors that the church would have to deal with during this period of time?
God, man.
Nope. Still, we're too early for that yet. Gnosticism.
Gnosticism.
Yeah. You're about to write something and realize it doesn't look right? Okay, Gnosticism, one of the very first forms of heresy will now arise during this particular period of time. We will also see during this particular time several men which we call the church fathers. You often hear of the early church fathers there during this particular period of time, and like Irenaeus and Clement and Tertullian and Origen, all of these in the 2nd century, so these are between 100 and 200 roughly. These early theologians who set about to deal with some of these issues, but also to begin to try to interpret and apply the writings of the apostles into the reality of church life. You know, because just because you have a letter from Paul doesn't mean that everybody understands its content and understands how to apply it in terms of taking a letter like that and turning it into theology. You need men who are starting to do some interpretation. So the early church fathers step into that role to begin to now start interpreting Scripture and creating systematic theology. Now, keep in mind that the early church fathers here are inconsistent. They are imperfect. Much of their theology doesn't pass the muster test for today. We know much, much more now and understanding across 2,000 years of church history what it is that we understand to be orthodox. These men did not necessarily know that, so we can't appeal necessarily to the early church fathers as our source of orthodoxy. But they're still valuable nonetheless. We have their extant writings, and we can we can look at them and we can see some of the things that they were talking about, and we can begin to see some of the doctrinal development that begins to take place. Okay, so as we move out of this primordial church and move into the early church, we move into a period of great persecution. Now, also what's going to take place during this particular period of time is the development of something called the canon of Scripture. The development of what we today call the 66 books of the Bible. The development of a canon or collection of these works. This is going to occur during this period of time. Contrary to popular belief, the canon of Scripture was developed long before 311. Okay? Some will point it to Nicaea, which is after 311. But no, there's a canon of Scripture being developed. The various letters being written by the apostles are being collected, they're being copied, they're being transmitted throughout the whole world, and the result of that is that they are being encapsulated into a canon. The church is beginning to agree on which books belong and which books do not. There's all kinds of extant works out there that have nothing to do with Scripture. We have the Gospel of Thomas, for example, a Gnostic work from the 2nd century that we don't include in our Bible because the church did not accept it as a part of Scripture in the 2nd century. So we see the development of a canon, and we see the broad dissemination of that canon throughout the Mediterranean basin. It's going east, it's going to Alexandria, it's in Egypt, it's going to Carthage in North Africa, it's going all over the place. Believers are taking copies of their works, the Scriptures, and going to all sorts of places. We will also see during this period of time the development of something called creeds. For example, the Apostles' Creed is developed during this particular period of time. We have early creeds in our Bibles. Paul mentions one in the early part of 1 Corinthians 15. A creed, a basic belief system of the church were developed during this particular period of time. We also have something here, which is the establishment of something we call the Catholic Church. Now that's with a lowercase c. Catholic as meaning universal. There's a sense in which during this period of time, during the persecuted church, the Christians are developing a unified church, a single body called Christianity throughout the world. We call it Catholic as a universal word. That word obviously has come to mean something much different now. And then, as I said, persecution is going to be the primary impetus for the Scriptures being canonized and distributed. Because persecution is going to do some things for Christians. What is it going to do? What are some of the things persecution is going to do during this particular period of time?
Draws them closer together.
Okay, it will draw them. That goes back to that Catholicity thing we were talking about. It's going to force Christians to codify their beliefs. What makes us different from everyone else? If you are a persecuted group of people, you are going to have to define what you believe and why you believe it under persecution. No one's going to accept persecution on the basis of not knowing what they believe. Okay? So it's going to force you to codify what you believe. It's going to force genuine conversions. Okay? Persecution is going to make people believe or not believe. Because you can't just be a middle-of-the-road sort of guy and be persecuted for your faith. You're going to lose that faith very fast if that's the case. It's also going to force Christians to evangelize. Okay? It's no longer going to be just the house religion. Okay? It's going to be a time in which Christians are going to multiply themselves by actually going out into a world in which they are being persecuted, and they will evangelize. And then finally, it's also going to keep the church and the state separated because the Christians are outsiders and outcasts. They don't belong in government. And so because they are persecuted, they're not going to be a part of government during this particular period of time. Okay? So this early church period is going to be one of the most significant periods of time in the life of the church from roughly 60 AD to roughly 311, where the church is going to be persecuted, it's going to be run down, there's going to be martyrs, there's going to be men attempting to codify the faith, there's going to be churches meeting underground trying to hold the faith fast, evangelizing their neighbors. The church is really actually going to be on the move during this period of time. All right. Now, who can tell me what happens in 311? Nope. Constantine, the conversion of Constantine. That's correct. Constantine, the emperor of the empire, the Western Empire, is converted in 311. And this begins a period of time which we call from here, 311, to 470. Oops, wrong color. I'm going to call this to 470. I keep changing colors here. 470, we're going to call this, Deb?
The Imperial Church.
The Imperial Church. Now, you should be able to figure out why it's called the Imperial Church, because when the emperor becomes a Christian, what happens?
Others are going to follow, whether they believe it or not.
Church and state become, but say that louder, Roger. Everybody becomes a Christian. Christianity becomes the de facto religion of the empire with Constantine's conversion. You remember how Constantine came to faith. He went out to meet his rival Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge, and as he was going, he apparently sees in the sky something called the labrium, or the labarium in the sky. The Greek letters chi and rho, which are the first two letters of Christos, the name of Christ, right? Looks like this. The chi and the rho. Looks like that. Ever seen that symbol before? That's what he apparently sees in the sky. He believes written next to it is go forth and conquer. So he goes and he conquers Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge. Maxentius falls off the bridge and drowns. He becomes a believer. He becomes a follower of Christ. And Christianity becomes the de facto religion of the state at this point. Now, let me be clear. It is not the official religion of the state. Nowhere is it ever declared that Christianity is the official religion. It simply becomes the de facto. Look, if the emperor is a Christian, then it seems reasonable that all of us should be too. Because that's how you buy and sell in an empire run by a Christian, so it's probably a good idea to become a Christian as well. In 313, right about there, we have another event that takes place. Anybody know what it's called? The Edict of Milan. Edict of Milan is an official statement by Constantine and his advisors of two things. Number one, all Christian persecution must now end. And secondly, anybody remember the second part of the Edict of Milan? Don't look at your notes. Don't cheat. All Christian persecution must end, and all properties taken from Christians must be returned. The Edict of Milan makes Christianity the de facto religion in the empire, officially ending Christian persecution. A few years after that, Constantine, now where is the Milvian Bridge? Anybody know? Okay, can you tell me where it's close to? Okay, let me give you a hint. Where are the emperors at this time? They're in Rome. Okay. Constantine decides he wants a new Rome, to establish a new Rome. And so he decides to move, I'm going to put it right about there somewhere. I don't even have a date for it. Right about there, he decides to move his imperial throne from Rome to Constantinople, otherwise known as the city of Constantine. Its original name was? Oh, no, it's not. Its original name was? The empire that arises ultimately from it is named for it the Byzantine Empire, which is from Byzantium. The original city was known as Byzantium. Today it is known as Istanbul. That's correct. Constantinople becomes the new headquarters of the Roman Empire. Now, Rome is still an important place. There's still a lot of things going on in Rome. But the city, the real city, the important city, is over now in Constantinople. It's moved to the east, to that bridge city that sits between the east and the west, between Europe and Asia. And that is where Constantine decides to move himself there. It is also the location of most of the controversies that occurred during this particular period of time in the church. All right? Now, during this particular period of time, during the imperial church, Christianity becomes the dominant religion of the empire. We see during this period also the rise of the monastic movement. Anybody want to tell me where the monastic movement started? Remember, where did the monastic movement start? The original movement of people out. Well, kind of, in the desert, in the Egyptian desert outside of Alexandria. Correct. Remember, the original reason for the monastic movement is a whole bunch of Christians says, well, you know what? Everybody's a Christian now. The faith has been watered down. I want to be a genuine Christian, so I'm going to move myself to a cave in the desert and just worship and serve God in that place, all by myself. Okay, that's the beginning of the monastic movement, which will continue for quite some time. During this period of time, we'll have a number of doctrinal issues that will rise. And the biggie during this period of time is...
God-man. Whether...
No, not the God-man issue.
Arianism.
Arianism. Arianism. What did Arius believe about the nature of the Trinity?
They were not separate.
God just created. Jesus said just created.
Okay,
Out of God.
not Jesus.
The second.
The second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, is not co-eternal with the Father in the sense that he is fully divine with the fullest nature of the Father, but rather is a created being who is given a certain divinity in the sense that he is created by God and established, but he's the firstborn creature in the world. Okay? Now, Arianism becomes the primary doctrinal problem of the imperial church, even beyond the imperial church. Okay? So hold that thought because we're going to come back to it. The Arian controversy was between Alexander on the one hand and Arius on the other. Alexander insisted that the Logos was co-eternal with the Father, whereas Arius argued that the Logos was a created being. All right, which leads us to right there. And we're going to put a date of 325. And what happens in 325?
Nicene.
The Council of Nicaea. The first great ecumenical council occurs, Nicaea. And what was Nicaea attempting to solve? What did Nicaea declare to be true about the nature of the Trinity? What did Nicaea declare to be true about the nature of the Trinity?
Each persons were all equal in character and person.
Correct. It wasn't so much about personhood, but about substance. The substance, or the key word of Nicaea, was the word homoousios, that the Father and the Son possess the fullness of the Godhead in their nature. All right, so Nicaea declared what we call Orthodox Trinitarian Christianity, that the Father and the Son, and by extension the Spirit, are all of the same nature as one another, distinct in personhood. That will come as a different issue. But they all possess the same substance. They are all co-eternal, coexistent with one another. However, even after Nicaea, Arianism continues. In fact, Arianism, to this day, but fundamentally, Arianism becomes, through the rest of this period of time, Arianism becomes the dominant view of Christianity. Even after Nicaea, Arianism wins the day. And the vast, vast, vast majority of Christians in this particular period of time are Arian, even after Nicaea. Okay? Another council will be called in, right about there, 381. This one is called the Council of Constantinople. The second great ecumenical council, okay? First great ecumenical council, second great ecumenical council, and the council is called for the purpose of establishing Nicene orthodoxy again in the attempt to bring about it, which leads us to the work of a particular individual, and that is a man by the name of Athanasius. You might say, and some historians put it this way, that Athanasius quite literally stood against the world, standing for Nicene orthodoxy, against the totality of Arianism, fighting to reestablish the Nicene orthodoxy of homoousios, stood against it, made great inroads, and died just 7 years prior to 381 when the Council of Constantinople was called to reaffirm Nicene orthodoxy, to once again state, yes, the Father and the Son are co-eternal and have the same nature and always have. So they reaffirmed it. During this period of time, we also have a number of church fathers, just as we have early fathers over here. We have fathers who were working in these days to defend doctrinal positions, to teach theology, to develop systematic theology. There's a number of them from the Cappadocians. And probably the single greatest father in the history of the church outside of the Apostle Paul, his name was Augustine. For those of you who are new to this class, Augustine is in Florida. Augustine is the church father. Okay?
That's why I remember.
Augustine is in Florida. Augustine is the church father. Okay. Augustine lived and died right about 430. So he's right near the end of this period of time, somewhere right about here. We'll put him right there. Okay. So Augustine is right about here. Probably one of the greatest thinkers in the history of the Christian church. Wrote City of God, had a great conversion story, as we know, if you've not known about him. And he is probably the single greatest force that was used during the days of the Reformation to attempt to restore orthodoxy in the church. And even today, many reformers will appeal, many reformed people, I should say, will appeal to Augustine, his work. We will also see during this period of time the expansion of Christianity, a great expansion of Christianity that will occur during this period of time. Probably the greatest expansion of Christianity that occurred in this time. We'll see Christianity go east into Armenia and Persia and Arabia from Rome and Constantinople. So we're going east towards Armenia to the north and west, to the north and east, and Arabia and Persia. We'll see it go south into Africa, the North Africa, and south even into Ethiopia. We'll see it go west to Spain and even off to Ireland. You remember Ireland becomes a significant location in Christian history because it is in Ireland where many of the great antiquities were being kept or were transferred there prior to the fall of the empire. So Ireland's going to have a tremendous effect upon the recapturing of the Western Roman Empire later. And then, of course, north even into Europe. The means that God used to bring the gospel to Europe was through what?
Through the advancement of the Visigoths and the people who were invaders.
The barbarians.
Barbarians, that's kind of.
The various invaders that will come into the empire from the north. They will come looking to find land and resources in the empire, which at this point, as you get close to 470, the empire, the Western Empire, the western side of the empire is crumbling. The legions are no longer capable of holding back the barbarians. The nation had become decadent and corrupt, and so it was ripe for invasion. But the irony of it is, as the various groups came down, the Goths, etc., that came down, as they came down to conquer, they settled, and guess what? They embraced the Christianity of the empire. And then very often they took it with them when they went home. They took it with them when they went home. And so Christianity began to spread through one of the most ironic means that God could use in his providence to bring about the expansion of the church, and that's the actual barbarians coming against the church, against the Western Empire. Which leads us to this event here, 470. What occurs in 470? Or roughly 470. The fall of the empire. The fall of Rome. Or more specifically, the fall of the Western Empire. Okay, now I need you to keep that in mind, because at this juncture, the Roman Empire is actually two-sided. There's two sides to the Roman Empire. You have the western side of the empire, which is headquartered at Rome, the old Roman Empire, and then you have the eastern side, which is headquartered where? Constantinople. There's still a succession of emperors on the throne in Constantinople, tracing their lineage all the way back to Constantine. All right? But the western side of the empire, headquartered at Rome, is beginning to crumble with the barbarian invasions. The eastern side of the empire is able to fend them off. In fact, Attila the Hun tried to capture Constantinople and failed. So he moved to the west because he said, hey, if I can't take them out, I bet I could take that weaker side out. And he did. All right? So this ends, the fall of Rome ends the imperial church, and we move into a period of time, or the rest of this particular period of time, which we're going to call the medieval church. The medieval church. And this one is going to go from about 470 all the way to 1517. And what happens in 1517? Can you be more specific? The 95 Thesis tacked to the door of Whitmer. Now, see, everybody knows that because, you see, we're real close to that event, right? That's my point earlier. The closer you get to the events, the more you know what it is. Okay, so here is the end of the medieval period. Okay, now when we call it the medieval period, we also call it the Middle Ages. Middle between what? Fall of Rome on the one side and Reformation on the other side, but more specifically, it's the middle between classical antiquity here and modernity over here. Okay, so this is the modern era here. This is classical antiquity, the ancient and ancient antiquity over here. This is in between the Middle Ages. All right? Now, I am arguing, some historians do not, but I'm going to argue that this period of time begins in 470, but there's a marked event that will basically come to an end about 700. A period of time between here and here of about 700, period of roughly 250 years, which I believe to be known as the Dark Ages. Now, the reason I'm referring that I am is because there are many historians who would argue that the entire medieval period is the Dark Ages. Would say that's all the Dark Ages, okay? But I disagree, and I'm just holding my opinion because I think that the Dark Ages are a particular period of time at the beginning of the medieval period between the fall of Rome and the Reformation, a short window of time at the beginning of this period that are truly dark, which then comes out of that into a sort of a quick renaissance that occurs at the end of that period of time with the establishment of something, all right? So this medieval church is the longest period of time, obviously, as you can see, in the history of the church. It's more than 1,000 years long. From 470 to 1517 is more than 1,000 years, right? So it's more than half of the total life of the church. We are only about 500 years removed from here, right? And this is only 470 from here to here, and all these are relatively short. So the Middle Ages is the longest period of time. So there's a great deal that we could talk about in this period, and we're not quite all the way through it yet. We'll be coming back to it next week. But I'm arguing that during the Dark Ages, what you have is the continuing advancement of the barbarians. It is during this period. The Dark Ages actually probably begins a little back here before 470, because you have the barbarian invasions really beginning somewhere back right about here, right? So from this point here out to about this point here, you have a number of barbarians that are coming into the territories. Now, obviously, in 470, the last actual emperor of the Western Empire is done away with. No empire rises up. So you have a period of barbarian invasions going on over a long period of time. Even after the fall of Rome, you have a continuing sense of these barbarians coming from the north into Roman territory. The Vandals, the Visigoths, the Franks, the Angles, the Saxons, the Ostrogoths, the Lombards. And all of these people are encountering Christianity and bringing it back with them into Europe. Okay, this is how Europe is being covered by Christianity. It's by these barbarians coming in to the old Western Empire, settling amongst them, and then sometimes sending their people back, or fighting with each other and going back north or whatever, and bringing Christianity with them to these places. Now, the primary characteristic of the medieval church in this period of time is based on the political reality. Nature abhors a vacuum, right? Something has to fill it. So when the Western Empire falls, something has to come along to take its place. And what comes along to take its place is the church. Okay? This is odd for us because we live in sort of a church-state separated world, but that wasn't the case. What we will see is the rise of the Western church to fill in the void left by the crumbling Western Empire. There's a number of things that will take place during this Middle Age, this medieval church here. So after the Dark Ages are over, or during the end of the Dark Ages, we will see a number of things occur in the church. Some of these occur even earlier. For example, the Benedictine monasticism arises during this period of time. So the old monasticism that was here during this period of time, which was very solitary in nature, where one guy would go out and live in a cave by himself, a new form of monasticism arose in which whole monasteries full of people would arise. Monastery, something like that. Okay. And you remember that it was governed by a rule, the rule of
The church?
nope.
Yeah.
Nope. The rule of Benedict. The rule of Benedict will be established. Benedict the monk will create a rule in which he will govern the monasteries by this rule. And so there will be people, groups of people who will go out. And these monasteries, listen, these monasteries will become very important. Because guess what the single most valuable thing you could own was? Probably still true today. Land. And guess who owned land? Monasteries. Okay? That's why this is an important point. Because once the empire falls and monasteries begin to grow up and they begin to take over lands, to farm them, to help people, because there's massive poverty and other kinds of things that occur during these barbarian invasions. The monasteries grow up to become sort of a source of help to the surrounding peoples, but they begin to collect land from people, and eventually these monasteries become extremely powerful by virtue of owning land. We also see during this period of time the rise of the papacy. The papacy is what? The Pope. Or more specifically, the office of the Bishop of Rome. Okay. The office of the Bishop of Rome is the papacy. Today we call him the Pope. But we think about, at this particular point, a bishop in Rome, and he is now finding himself in a position of great authority and power because he's the head of the church in the West. In fact, most popes began to see themselves as sort of the patriarch of the West. The Eastern Church is headquartered in Constantinople. There's a whole set of bishops and patriarchs over there, but there's also a Western Church headquartered in Rome with all of its authority, but the authority becomes invested in the West in a single individual. He's the Pope. Notice, there's no emperor over here. In the East, there's an emperor, isn't there? In the East, there's an emperor governing the political realities of life and a bishop or a patriarch covering the spiritual realities of life. They were check and balance with each other, were they not? But guess what happens over here when you don't have an emperor in the West? You now invest all of the authority in a man. The papacy grows. Okay, so you want to know where the popes come from. This is where you start to see it. The Bishop of Rome starts to see himself in a very important position. Leo the Great in 440 to 461, during the invasions of the Huns and the Vandals, is one of the first bishops of Rome to actually solidify real power into the position of the Pope. During the 5th to the 7th centuries, we have another theological debate, okay? The theological debate that occurs here is actually a Christological debate, and it has to do with the nature of Jesus, okay? And more specifically, the nature of Jesus as the God-man. The nature of this Christological debate was the view of Jesus having two natures, a divine nature and a human nature. He is, after all, human. You know, he walked around in Galilee and they strung him up on a cross. But Christianity has always believed as well that he's divine. I mean, after all, if he is the Son, the Logos, as John puts it in the early part of his gospel, then he possesses divinity. So how does this divinity and this humanity work together? Well, there were some who said, well, Jesus was fully divine in every sense, but only appeared to be human. And then there are those on the other side that said, well, Jesus was fully human and veiled and basically lost all of his divinity temporarily while he was on the earth, swung the pendulum in the other direction, okay? And this debate continued through all of the 5th through the 7th centuries. From roughly about 400 or so all the way to about 600 during this period of time, we have the Christological debates occurred, and there are 5 other ecumenical councils that take place during this particular period of time in an attempt to deal with this. The 3rd through 6th ecumenical councils, that's 4, right? 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, that's 4, I'm sorry. 4 ecumenical councils, the first and second were Nicaea and Constantinople, and then there are 4 additional ones, but the primary one that comes about actually occurs before the fall of the Roman Empire, believe it or not. It actually occurs right about here in 451. 451, and that one is known as, I'm going to write it in blue just to match it here, okay, star, okay, the Council of Chalcedon. The Council of Chalcedon confirmed the Orthodox position that we hold to today, that Jesus is fully God and fully man, possessing 2 distinct natures without confusion, change, division, or separation. Jesus is the God-man. He's fully God, fully man. He has all the He has all the attributes of man. He has all the attributes of God. They coexist in a single person as two distinct natures. Neither nature overcomes the other. Jesus was able to exercise fully all of his prerogatives as a human, as well as all of his prerogatives as divine. Contrary to the very popular belief of our day that Jesus sort of veiled, or I should say set aside, he veiled, but set aside his divine prerogatives, that is heretical. Chalcedon argued that Jesus did not set aside his divinity to become human. He still possessed all of his divinity. The way my friend puts it, he puts it like this: the helpless baby in a manger was holding together the manger under him. That's the reality of the God-man. That is traced to Chalcedon in 451, as well as a number of other councils. In this period of time, right between the between the 5th and, in the 7th century, I didn't bold that, somewhere between about here, 600 or so, to about 700, this particular little window right in here, we also see the rise of something else in the world. Starts in Arabia. It's called Islam. By the beginning of the 8th century, Islam would have control over most of the ancient Christian centers. Palestine would be under its control. Arabia would be under control. Persia, Syria, North Egypt, North Africa, and Spain would all be under Islamic control by the beginning of the 8th century. This would have a massive effect, of course, upon the church in many different ways. And then in the 9th and 10th centuries, so we move ahead from the 8th into the 9th, we'll come to right about here, and we'll put 800 here. We have an event that takes place in 800, and I will give you a hint as to when it occurs. It occurs on Christmas Day of 800, and it is what? Christmas Day of 800.
Great Schism.
Nope, that's in 1054. We're not quite there yet. The crowning by Pope Leo III of Charles the Frank, otherwise known as Charlemagne. Charlemagne becomes the emperor of a new empire. The Pope, you will notice, crowns this man, Charles, who at that time was actually the head of an empire centered in Europe called the Carolingian Empire. It's so hard to say. Carolingian Empire was stretched all the way across Europe, but Pope Leo III put a crown on his head and named him the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, which, ironically, only lasts for about 100 years. But nonetheless, there it is. And this becomes a new Western empire that rises up to replace the old Western empire that was vacated with all of the barbarians booting out the real emperors, and the church rising up to take its place. All right. This is where we are at the moment, pretty much. We have reached this point at roughly 900 or so, right in here, where we are working our way through the Middle Ages, working our way towards the Reformation. We still have a few more details to get through the medieval church here, and then we will work our way into the Reformation. But what I hope that you see is the movement of God through this, all right? And I want to leave you with one final thought as we close. All of this is history in the macro sense, okay? This is history and all of what God is doing in time and space, okay? It's important. A lot of details in here give us some ideas of where our theological debates have taken place and the various heresies and heterodoxies that need to be dealt with, as well as why it is that Europe is Christian what made Europe Christian, what created Western civilization with a Judeo-Christian worldview, etc., as we move through this. Okay, you get all that in the macro level, but there's a micro level too. And the micro level is the level I think that God is most interested in. Because during any one of this particular period of time, there are individual people who are, of themselves, either trusting in Christ or continuing in their reprobation. There are elect people in all of these categories, all through this time that God brings His gospel through. Sometimes through ways we can't even imagine how they could come to faith in Christ. And yet, somehow, God puts a thread all the way through this that He has a people that He is keeping for Himself day by day, and that's really the most important part of church history. There's an elect people in every tribe, in every tongue, in every nation, and every time in the history of the church. Okay? So while all this is important and valuable and good for us to learn, we must never forget that God is using all of this to accomplish individual souls being saved by Him along the way. It's easy for us, isn't it, to get caught up in all of this and forget about this picture down here. God is working through the strangest way in history. I mean, none of us would have gone like this, right? None of us would have developed it like this, but God did. And yet He was doing so to bring people to Christ. Okay? Now, I think what you'll find, hopefully, as we go along, those of you who are just joining us on this little escapade, you'll discover that what we're doing is we're pushing ourselves into understanding why it is we believe what we believe today. There's a lot of this that helps us to understand who we are as a people, particularly as Westerners, because this is Western history. In fact, most people in the West don't even realize that there are actually 3 branches of Christianity today, not just 2. We think of Protestantism and Catholicism, but we forget about the Eastern Church, the Orthodox Church, that's out there as well. So this will help us to understand more of those kinds of things. Okay? So I hope this has been helpful to you, and I would encourage you, if you've not been with us, to go back and maybe pick up a lecture or 2 along the way on some particular area of this that you might be interested in that will help you kind of catch up to where we are. So next week, Lord willing, we'll pick up our look here past the Holy Roman Empire and finish out the end of the medieval church. And then we start getting into the fun part of church history.